All right. Well, we are here with Matt Ponesi, who is a professor of history and Latin at Ohio Dominican University. And most importantly, he is my favorite person on Instagram. So if you go to Medievalist Matt on Instagram, which yes, Instagram's a weird thing because I roll over in the morning in bed and you're there next to me.
Nah, that's
And then as I go to bed at night, you're there as well. But I guess it is a weird thing because I spend so much time on this,
mm-hmm.
and
and I'm an unlikely Instagram user.
yeah.
I was definitely late to the game. I don't pretend to know what media the kids today are using, and Facebook has long gone outside of the control of the younger generation. It's people our age, that are crowding it with pictures of kids, etc.
Yeah.
And I had an Instagram account. I really don't know what I was using it for when I had Facebook, and even then I was the occasional Facebook user. But Instagram, there's something about it that I find a little more engaging. Part of it is my ability to connect with people who I otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah.
Facebook is family and friends, and if any of my family and friends are watching this, no offense, but sometimes I don't want to connect. Sometimes not everything in my life, that I do, is what my family wants to talk to me about. In fact, let me tell you, no one in my family wants me to talk about medieval history. So Instagram allows me to kind of, connect with a community of people who might share my same interests. Whereas, my friend down the street that I might run with, or parents of kids, who happen to be, our children in the same school, that might be for Facebook. But Instagram allows me to kind of pursue my own passions and kind of put myself out there in a way I wouldn't, on Facebook. But strangely, and maybe I'm wrong because I no longer have the pulse of, the new generations, but it's still retained. It's still used by younger people as well. And that's one of the reasons why I developed this account. It actually started out more of a slightly serious history account.
Mm-hmm.
It was meant to simply allow me to connect with my students outside the classroom, but in a fun, fun-loving, lighthearted way. So yeah, it's interesting. None of this was intended. Never intended to make one meme in my life, but there it is. So
It is interesting. I mean, we could even just talk about even the use of the word meme, how that word has become so the word works. We've been needing that word for a while to describe this sort of tidbit of humorous information that we all can kind of rally around and go, oh yeah, that meme.
Yeah, it's and I have looked this word up on many occasions and attempted to understand its origin and its development over time. And it's like me playing the card game, what is it, Gin Rummy?
Yeah.
Every time I play that game, I have to be reminded how to play it. I play it all the time, but I always forget the rules. And meme is a word that, academically to understand, I have to look it up every time. It just doesn't stay with me. And I think one of the reasons is, it's taken on a meaning. I know what it does. I know how it encapsulates a moment in time, a moment of a popular culture that allows us to kind of intersect important issues, important, events in history with the present. And it's meant for ease of communication, but oftentimes the meaning is quite subtle and profound. And that's what I particularly like about it. I like how on the surface it could be simplistic, it could be absurd, which I love. for the longest time, I was trying to figure out my humor is just, if I have humor, it's sort of, I would have always said it's crazy. There's no rhyme or reason. And I always loved, one of my favorite cartoonists is Gary Larson of The Far Side. And I'm the first one to say this guy must have like 3 PhDs, the amount of science and anthropology and in his cartoons, and yet his cartoons can be understood on the most simplistic level as just pure absurdity.
Yeah.
And I love, you could take it at that and enjoy it just as that, or you could look beneath the surface and see something really intelligent. And I'm not saying I'm like that, but that's kind of what I like about memes. They're able to communicate on so many different levels.
Well, and it's this idea, we could spend an entire time just talking about your dad jokes, but in the dad joke competition.
Yeah.
But like, the thing is even if the meme is not funny, it can still work.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
there's the funny level. And if it's just like, why has he got a whole collage of snails fighting knights?
Right.
And you're like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the point, is it's really weird.
And oftentimes it doesn't need explanation.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. With this, as I said, it started as a way for me to, the origin story, not
Yeah.
like I need one, not like I'm a superhero or something, but the origin story of this, I mentioned, was it was for students, but I was forced into the most dreary faculty development session I think I've ever been in. Now, faculty development, many people know, excuse me, I shouldn't sort of denigrate them, but
I used to be an English teacher, so I know
well.
a whole week can be lost just sitting through those.
Right. So, I'm only half attentive at best, and I'm mostly just insulted that my time is being wasted. And so let's just say I don't go into these with a very generous kind of spirit. And of course, the session was on technology in the classroom. And I'm one of these old-fashioned, professors. I do medieval history and Latin. Latin on a computer is kind of sacrilegious. It needs chalk, clouds of chalk, and a blackboard. But of course, technology in the classroom. So I'm just there under duress, and all of a sudden, one of the presenters start talking about social media, and I think I roll my eyes a little bit. But if there's anything about me being a teacher that really kind of makes it all worthwhile, I just absolutely love the connection with students, and I love, my fulfillment comes from, the engagement I have with my students, and knowing that they're getting it and they're excited and they're just, lapping it up. And I'm still at the stage in teaching. This was actually, it was never the case when I first started. When the summer hit, I was running to my car and I wasn't looking back. But I guess my kids are getting older now and I'm getting older now. But at the end of the semester, believe it or not, I'm kind of like a little bit of a letdown. Oh, I have 4 months. I miss that engagement. And so when I heard them talking about social media as a way to connect outside the classroom, to stay in contact with people, I kind of, that really resonated. And so that's how this started. And I would do kind of like little history tidbits, facts of the day, or this day in history, or if something came up in my lecture, I might kind of develop it. And they used to be a little more thought out, clearly, than they are now. A little more serious. Sometimes they were lighthearted. And I had these dear students of mine who must have looked at me like some, grandpa who, just felt sorry for me, so they would like my content. So I'd have like 40 followers, and they'd all be students, and they'd be like, "Oh, Panesi posted. He doesn't even get it. He's not using this the way, but let's give him a pat on the back." But then more and more, I kind of just, I liked the challenge, waking up every morning. You said you wake up and there I am on the phone, right?
Yeah.
And I like seeing everybody else on the phone too. But my challenge is every morning when I wake up at 6 in the morning, I have an hour before my family stirs. And I just sit there, just scrolling through, waiting for inspiration. Scrolling, I look through manuscripts, I look through, you know, other meme, you know, depositories. My Facebook account is, you know, I said family's on it, but when it's not family, it's just all these silly discussion groups, dad jokes, dumb hub, like just stupidity, like all this stuff. And I'm just kind of waiting. And I'm curious, in an hour, can I produce something? I love the creative process. And I'm not going to lie, I really love the immediate feedback. You know, in academia, it takes a long time to disseminate ideas. And I'm one of these, you know, it's always been my nature. You know, I kind of, like many people, like kind of immediate feedback. You know, I get a rush, I get a thrill out of that. You know, doing the very painstaking research and the publication process, it takes a lot of time to get feedback. And even then, it's very minimal. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been at a conference, delivered a paper, and there's sort of crickets. I've said it all. What more can be said? You know, you know, so I love, it's become just a hobby and a challenge. I just love the challenge. And the humor stuff is, you know, my wife knows I'm funny. She wouldn't be with me. Excuse me. I don't think I'm funny. My wife knows I'm funny. She said it a few times. But after 20 years, she's not always, you know, going to stand up and, you know, applaud me for it. You know, so Instagram, I kind of like connecting with a receptive community, you know. So anyways, I don't know if I gave you more than you wanted on that, but
No, this is great. In fact, I do have to ask you a very specific, as a medieval scholar, I really I need to know, what's the deal with the rabbit with the sword that we see in like the illuminated text, like off in the margins? Do we know why there's a rabbit holding a sword?
So there's lots of theories, and so Instagram is also a source of great mistaken identity. I think I'm presenting myself to people in ways that might not be authentic. So one way is some people, believe it or not, are following me because they think it's a Benedict Cumberbatch fan page,
Of course.
which I don't think, you know, I resemble at all. But other people follow me because they think I'm an art historian.
Yeah.
They think that I specialize in image. Instagram is primarily a medium that deals in image. Obviously, I love how you could interplay. There's lots of room for text. So many places, you know. You know, you have text, you could embed it in like the image. You could put it above the image. You could put it in a description. You know, it's really amazing how, you know, how many levels of meaning you can kind of place at different places in the image. But it's primarily for images, and I deal in manuscripts most of the time, and I never run out of material. Like there's always something. So I am not the greatest authority on this question, and yet I use these rabbits all the time. There's lots of theories. I think the predominant theory is, on a literal level, they may represent foreigners, like they may represent a foreign people or an enemy. I don't know if I buy it, but I'm not an expert enough to know what my arguments would be to that. What I'm in favor of, I've heard that they're more of kind of like metaphorical. They represent vices or weaknesses, you know, sort of like anti-hero. They represent, instead of courage, they might represent, you know, a lack of courage or cowardice. So I do like that as a possible explanation. You know, so you have these knights fighting these supposedly benign creatures, that it's setting up this like interplay between, virtues and vices and an internal battle in a knight. That's really cerebral and complex. But I'm most persuaded by kind of like what we were talking about with memes not having to make sense. I really do think, if you look at, see, I'm a historian, I deal with texts. I don't deal with image. I can't help read the text beside these images. They have nothing to do with each other. You could read, it could be the beginning of a monastic office. Lord, make haste to help me. And beside it, it might show some half-naked guy, doing something lewd, in the margin. It has nothing to do with it. It's absolutely absurd. And honestly, I think that's probably where the truth of it lies. These scribes, these illustrators are having fun.
Yeah.
And they're doing their work kind of separate to the text. I mean, a lot of the times they would be done at different times in the preparation of a manuscript. So I honestly, I don't think they have much meaning other than amusement or entertainment. But it's an excellent question.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, once again, I would encourage people to go to your Instagram, Medievalist Matt, and you will see like, yeah, sometimes the text will have like just pretty flowers or nice little swirls, and then occasionally you'll get like this elephant that looks nothing like have they ever seen an elephant? Maybe they haven't. Maybe someone's just described an elephant to them and they're trying their best.
Yeah.
But it is absurd. And yeah, some of that stuff, yeah, I think it's fascinating. So I like that the memes on one level are just poking at the humor of it, but it also kind of invites people to get in on the joke.
Yeah. Oh
You're
yeah,
like, oh,
absolutely. Yep. I do think, I'm thinking who even owns books?
yeah,
Now, clearly the scholars and the churchmen who would commission books, these beautiful sacramentaries and these beautiful gospel books. Well, yeah, what I was about to say, you typically wouldn't have the grotesques and the absurd. That's not necessarily true. But a lot of the books of hours, the private, this is later Middle Ages where, families might have a small collection. A lot of these kind of amusing images you would find there. I wonder, different people are reading it. I can just imagine a kid, leafing through it, just looking at pictures, not understanding the text whatsoever. I'm not saying that's why it was intended to be, but clearly books that were under private ownership would have been read by many at different levels. So, again, part of me thinks, sometimes these images, they might be tacit criticisms against the church. Like, so if this is sort of a psalter, if this is a book of Psalms being read for spiritual edification or being sung in the chapel, a lot of the images that shows clerics, shows priests and monks just being naughty and being inappropriate, they're humorous. But I think there's also a warning there. It's meant to encourage them to kind of a greater spiritual practice. And the amount of demons and the amount of devils and hell mouths, and they look very humorous. And my last point on this, I guess, that just occurred to me is what we find humorous might not have been humorous. What we find humorous, these little demons, they look like Muppets. They look like Jim Henson created them in his workshop. But to a medieval mind, they might have seemed hideous and might have seemed absolutely terrifying. I want to. Part of what makes these memes effective is they remind us of parts of our modern culture, and that's where the absurdity occurs. Because we know that these are hundreds and hundreds of years old. And yet, hey, isn't that the creature from Where the Wild Things Are? Or isn't that a Jim Henson creature? Or like, that's what I like doing. Or, just in recent, you know, if you look at enough of them, and I don't want you to think that I intellectualize everything I do, but I am interested in what are people most receptive to? You know, what are the ones that work? And I particularly, just when I see an image, I just want to put a caption on it, you know, so it's just a little detail from a medieval manuscript and it suggests something to me. But what it suggests is obviously something modern and detached from its original purpose. And that is where I think kind of the humor might lie. And those tend to be well received, I guess. But the ones that are best received are things like who wore it best. You know, who wore it best. So if I take some fashion designer's crazy and ridiculous idea for a lavish kind of gala, and I find it's kind of analog in the Middle Ages, people just love it.
Yeah.
It's what do these things mean to us today? What do they remind us of? And so the humor might actually not have anything to do with the Middle Ages at all. Might never have intended to be humorous, but it's humorous to us now because of the familiarity with something that's kind of in our mind recently.
Yeah, I mean, and we could go off on a whole other conversation about this, but I even like things like the fact that the barbarians exist is probably the reason why we're wearing pants now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the barbarians were like the original pants wearers.
That's right. That's right.
And now we have pants. And it's like, it's funny things you're like, as you're learning and reading about, you're like, oh, all right, did not.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I don't do this for purely virtuous reasons. But if there is a virtuous reason in doing this, and if I do need to convince myself this is somewhat a part of my job, which in some ways, you know, I said it was a way for me to keep in touch with students and to engage them more outside of the classroom. And it absolutely is. It's also part of my recruiting process. I want students in my classes. And, you know, at every university, if you're in history, if you're in Latin, you're not your university's first priority when it comes to, you know, giving you resources. And even when it comes to getting students in the classroom, they don't require Latin as a language at my university. So anyone in my Latin classes has to have chosen it. They're not forced to be there. So how do I connect? How do I offer something to these students? You know, this is almost like advertising for me. So there's that. Another tangent to that is, and it's slightly virtuous, I will say, but it's also mercenary of me. You know, I care about my university, and small religious affiliated universities are just in a bind in this modern era. You know, when people are viewing education as being solely job preparation, when you know, you need to make higher education as economical as possible, the losers in this are going to be your small liberal arts universities. And it's tough. I mean, I think I had 1 year where I wasn't worried about the next year and about the financial health of the university. And that's because I was naive and it was my first year here. Ever since then, I started tightening my belt. And I've run out of notches and I keep making new ones every year because that's the environment we're in. And so in some ways, you know, occasionally you might see, even in my story, I'll throw in something from my university because I want people to know about it. You know, I want people to know that this is such a phenomenal place, and it's Ohio Dominican.
Oh yeah, I got it right there.
Throwing it out there. But that's one of the reasons why I do this is, I guess if I have even a moderate audience, I'm going to tell them about my university. You know, that's why I keep that in the bio. And that's why I occasionally share things about it, because it's beautiful. It's a phenomenal place. There's lots of history. And I think we do what we do really well. So that's the second virtuous reason, I guess, why I do it. But going back to your barbarian wearing pants, I do it because I want to connect people with history, you know, and I want people, and you might get a laugh at the meme. But then in the description, even though I don't have a lot of time to do this, that's where you can kind of plant seeds, and that's where you can kind of indicate, the truth of something. I think I posted something on Big Bird today. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
Um, but even in the source of that, image, it's not Big Bird. That's the devil. Well, I mean, I don't know, that raised my eyebrows. Who's depicting the devil as some feathered creature, removing souls? Like it just generates immediate questions on, how did people think about the afterlife, and what do people think about, the end of their lives and what's going to happen to themselves. So I do kind of like connecting the past to the present, and this is a way I never thought existed. I never thought a meme, part of me thought that this is actually irresponsible. If you're going to teach people history, teach them properly. This isn't even teaching 1% of history. This is just a hint of it. But you know what? If a hint gets people to kind of even reflect for a second, then it's worthwhile. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I've got one more question before I let you go, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. I could keep talking about this because my oldest daughter, was making fun of me. And she said, Dad, men, when they get to a certain age, go one of two ways. They either get obsessed with medieval documentaries on the History Channel, or they get obsessed with World War II documentaries on the History Channel.
All right.
So I was wondering, is there kind of like a sharks and jets thing between like the World War II historians and the medieval historians?
Yeah.
Like, is there a?
Yeah, it's funny. Your question went in a way I didn't think it was going to go.
Okay.
And I wondered if you were going to give me the choice. What documentary am I going to watch?
Yeah. Are you the World War II history guy, or the?
Believe
I would
it or not,
assume.
I will watch the World War II history documentary only for the reason that I can't watch documentaries because it makes me think, if I'm going to learn about this, I need to learn about it properly, which means where are the sources, where are the texts? And so I would rather watch a documentary on an area that I'm less of an expert in. So I will be a little more, engaged in the World War II. But when it comes to history, I'd like to think that dichotomy that, is absolutely a correct one. And I can go to students at my university, and it's not, are you a European historian, or are you a world historian, are you a US historian? It's medieval battles or World War II battles. That's kind of the divide. It's so interesting that your daughter kind of conceived of it that way.
Yeah.
And it's true.
Yeah.
It is absolutely true. And it would actually, I think it would be helpful if I use that as a question when I'm trying to determine what path a student wants to go down. Those would be easier questions than for me to say, what academic concentration do you want? But I'm going to stick to the Middle Ages, for me. So.
Well, and it is funny. Like, I mean, my introduction to medieval history is so surface level. I'm still learning so much, but even my wife will send me something that's about like medieval torture. And I'm like, well, actually, the Iron Maiden wasn't really a thing. It's highly over exaggerated, blah, 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 blame future generations for inflating.
Right.
But like, she's just trying to show me something. And I'm like, sorry, I ruined it.
Yeah. And I love hearing what you're doing. And you sound very much like a historian. You sound very much like a medievalist, if that's what you're doing.
I'm trying.
Because medievalism, it's kind of like I'm a Canadian by birth, and even though I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm a Canadian. And it seems like a lot of the time, what I'm trying to do is kind of not defend, but inform people, beyond their assumptions. No, Canada this, Canada that. I know where I know my little Canada sense just tingles if the Hollywood actor, or Justin Bieber, or
Yeah.
every Canadian needs to know who's famous and where they are at all times. It's just something that we do, and we are always promoting. We are always very proud. When it comes to being a medieval historian, very similarly, there's a lot of prejudice because of what later historians have said about the Middle Ages, what the humanists have said, how they decry it as a backward and uncivilized and barbarous age. Well, I want to liberate it. I want to kind of steer people correct. So exactly what you were doing, some people are just kind of, no, I was just pointing this out, or I just thought that was an article you might want to read. I can't help myself. I can't help myself. Well, actually, what's going on here? Well, witchcraft trials, let me tell you, they didn't believe in witches in the Middle Ages. They didn't take them seriously. That's a much later thing. No one burned witches in the stake in the Middle Ages. And of course, people are like, what?
What?
Because every movie and every
Yeah.
tweet about it, chastigates the Middle Ages for it. So yeah, I'm very defensive. And I see it as my job to liberate, to redeem the medieval experience in our modern world. So.
Well, and I'm painting with kind of a broad brush here, but I do think the World War II crowd, I mean, there is, once again, a broad brush, but there is a little bit more certainty when you research World War II. Like, we know that Winston Churchill existed, but people go, well, did King Arthur exist? And you go, well, maybe, kind of, but not the way you think, and probably not when you think, and may not have even been named Arthur.
And just on that subject, and just on, well, what type of history are you? Are you World War II or medieval? Believe it or not, one of the reasons why I'm not a World War II historian is it's too complex for me. There's too much. I actually do better when, the literary record or the historical record is a little more limited. I like the challenge of rebuilding the scene with limited resources. I'd rather have less to deal with than more, because I just find it too overwhelming, but you're right. And another, just on that point, another thing that tends to happen is what little is said about the Middle Ages, people just assume if there's one sentence written, well, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
No historian operates that way. One person might have said something. That doesn't mean it's true. Historians don't just accept people's word. If somebody said King Arthur existed, that has nothing to do with whether King Arthur existed. It's just so, it's clouded. There's so many mists surrounding this. But at the same time, there's ways to kind of clear that. There's books, there's still, and this is my students, and I know we're slightly over time, but my students are just look at me with incredulity when I say there's still history to be discovered. It's just like science. There are scientific breakthroughs, there's historical breakthroughs. So like, how can you discover new history? And I'm like, well, people have just, swept history under a rug. There are libraries, there are sources that people either have ignored, have dismissed, or haven't given serious enough attention to, and just bringing this back to Instagram, believe it or not, this has made me a far better historian because it's kind of opened my eyes to the wealth of information that we have that I was even unaware of. It's actually restored a lot of my passion for the period. You get into a career and it becomes very, monotonous in some ways. And, I used to go to the Renaissance Festival when I was fresh out of graduate school, and I'd look around and, I'd walk around with an air of superiority and disdain, oh, well, there were no pirates like this, and people weren't wearing sexy outfits, and I don't know why the Star Trek guy, is walking around. That's how I used to be.
No one knows.
No one knows, but I'm happy they are, because now I've changed. I'm looking kind of to recharge my batteries. I'm looking for a reason to be passionate about it. And so I absolutely love kind of the Renaissance type fairs. And, I love all of this media, that I was unaware even existed. but Instagram's given me a great excuse to kind of familiarize myself with it.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for setting some time aside to talk to me and to everyone that is grabbing this video. If anyone's curious, once again, Instagram, and then go to Medievalist Matt. And of course, also they can click the link and they can support you on your Mordor fun run.
Yes. Oh, please do. That would be great. I'm not even through the Mines of Moria, so I thought it was going to take 1 year. I think it's going to take more like a decade for me to finish this, but I'm going to finish. So I appreciate the support.
Yes, it's let's see, 1,779 miles.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So I'll get there. I'll get there. But
You'll get to Mount Doom.
That's right. Well, thank you for having me. That was a delight to chat with you. I really enjoyed it.
You too. Thank you so much. Well, I will see you on my phone soon.
Sounds good. Definitely. All right. Take care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.